Hello everybody, welcome to today's battle report, which is a 4500 point game of Infernal Dwarves against the Vampire Covenant. My friend Nat is on the Infernal Dwarves and I am on the Vampire Covenant. Before we get into it, I'm going to ask you, if you've not done so already, to hit that like and subscribe button. In a moment, as always, I will flash up the army lists and you can pause and take a closer look if you like. And then we will get straight into deployment. Okay, here we are in deployment. So our deployment type was marching columns. That's the one where you start on one side and keep on deploying in one direction. So both Nat and I started on the left of the screen that you can see here. So I put down my Altar of Undeath first, for example, and then continued heading this way. Nat put down this unit here and continued heading this way. So marching columns was the deployment type, and capture the flags is the secondary objective. So let's just go through Nat's army and then my own. So we've got a unit of Infernal Dwarf Warriors here, then a Kadim Chariot, a Vassal Slingshot, a Prophet on a Kadim Chariot, Titan Mortar, Disciples of Luger with a Prophet of Luger, some Vassal Cavalry, big unit of Vassal Levies, another Vassal Slingshot, another Titan Mortar, then a unit of Torok Anointed with a Torok Commissioner, and finally another unit of Infernal Dwarf Warriors. On my side, an Altar of Undeath, then another Altar of Undeath, unit of Giant Bats, Bat Swarm, unit of Skeleton Warriors with 3 Banshees, unit of Zombies with a Necromancer, unit of Skeletons with a Barrow King and a Vampire Count, big unit of Zombies, and a pair of Shrieking Horrors. Right, now, Nat deployed pretty much all of his army before I'd got mine down. I think I put down these first 3 and then Nat dropped his whole army, ensuring that he would go first, and there were no vanguards. So we will get straight into Nat's movement 1. Okay, so here's Nat's movement 1. I should have mentioned in the previous clip there, you can see the 3 marked units on Nat's side for the capture the flags, and mine here, here, and here. Anyway, so just an advance from Nat, a fairly cautious advance, to be honest. He could have come at me much faster, but he's evidently not done. I think he's got his Infernal Warriors sort of a little bit stuck here. I think if I were him, I might have brought the Anointed further this way to create a gap for his Infernal Warriors, but he might be holding them back deliberately. I'm not sure. Anyway, bit of a steady advance there. That's Nat's movement 1. Okay, on to the end of Nat's turn 1 here then. And in his magic phase, I dispelled both the Curse of Nizbakesh and the Fireball, but he did get through a Silver Spike, which did 3 wounds on the altar over here. He then continued to target the altar with his artillery pieces, but they all missed. All of them. The ballistas were hitting on 5s and the mortars were hitting on 4s. I'm not sure whether both of the mortars were in range or not. I think they were. Anyway, so a little bit unlucky for Nat's turn 1 there. Certainly a turn 1 of his that I'm happy to take. Just a few wounds on the altar. That's the end of Nat's turn 1. Okay, so on to my turn 1 here then. There are multiple units in Nat's army that I have some fairly serious concerns about. I mean, his core troops alone with the Infernal Warriors are 15 points per model, fight an extra rank with great weapons and the profile of a dwarf. So they're pretty beefy. And then this Torok Anointed unit is rocking 19 strength 7 AP 4 attacks, which is just bonkers for 505 points. So anyway, I'm wanting to keep them at a distance and inflict as much harm as I can with my limited ranged attacks, as much as possible really. So what I've done is dropped this Bat Swarm in the way of the Toroks here. If these guys overrun, that they come this way and you know, potentially run into the bats maybe. I'm not sure whether they will or not. I don't think that they will go so far as to come into contact with this unit, and if they do, then there's the possibility of flank charges and what have you. So anyway, I've dropped the unit of bat swarms there, and then I've flung out the banshees to do some screeching at these Taurochs in my shooting phase, advancing with the shrieking horrors here, using the impassable terrain as cover against the various flaming and flammable causing war machines. This is going to delay their effectiveness, but it's also keeping them alive, so I'm satisfied with that. Moving around here, planning on bringing my Vampire Barrow King unit, the battering ram as it basically is, with a static 8 points of resolution, or seven or 8 static res anyway, through the middle, and the zombies. I mean, you're never going to get through all the zombies, there's just so many of them, particularly when my plan is to sort of be buffing these units over time. I'm sidestepping one way with my Necromancer here and the other way with my Skeletons, so that by the time that this unit gets engaged, should there be an overrun, it's not going to overrun into the Necromancer. Down on this side of the board, I'm using this altar as bait because it's already wounded. It's only a matter of time before it dies. What I'm hoping Nat will be tempted to do is kind of come in this way and think that this altar can't declare a charge, when of course it can, because it has the ghost step rule, so it can charge through the terrain piece here. So I'm wondering whether Nat will realise that or not. So that's kind of the plan down there, but it's a soft left flank, of course. Anyway, that's the end of my movement 1. Let's get on to my turn 1. Okay, so my magic turn 1, I picked up Flux card number 1. Now that sounds like really bad news, but I'm actually really happy about it because I can get it out of the way and I can force a spell through. Having 4 dice and then 3 Veil tokens and channeling 3 puts me at 6 to 4. So what I've decided to do is keep 3 of the Veil tokens and go in at 5 to 4. Now, if I'm rocking 5 dice and Nat's got 4 and I've got multiple copies of Arise, that means I'm going to get 1 through with fairly little risk to myself. I'm going to 3 dice Arise, and then if Nat dispels that with his 4 dice, I'm going to put the remaining 2 into a bound Arise, and if he doesn't, if he goes for stopping the bound spell, then I should get Arise the other way. So I'm actually really happy to have gotten card 1, which, as you can see, did go off and buffed my 2 skeleton units and 1 of my zombie units. So a bit of growth down here, basically. Shooting phase, the Banshees did a really good job. They overperformed massively, doing 3d6 plus 6 hits. They did 17 plus 6 hits, so I rolled a 5, 6, 6. So a massive overperformance from them, inflicting 9 wounds on the unit here. So that was pretty savage actually. So really happy with turn 1. Right, let's get on to Nat's movement 2. Okay, on to Nat's movement 2 here then, and you can see he's got off 2 charges. He has charged the Bat Swarm with the Tauroch Anointed, which makes sense, get the chaff out of the way. And he's got off a charge with his Vassal Levies here on the Bat Swarm. These Vassal Levies, goblins with 2 attacks each, and battle focus, and reroll charge distances. Oh, honestly, this Infernal Dwarfs army book, makes me rage, it does. Anyway, so they're in there, and then more of the sort of cautious advance coming from Natty is advancing towards this chariot here. I wonder whether he realises that I've got a charge here on his flank, but it is only with a chariot against a bulked up unit. So what I'm now thinking is a charge this way, should this unit remain, and then charge this way with the chariot and sort of crunch through this unit, overrun and get a sort of a double round of combat out of my vampire is what I'm hoping for. But we shall see whether I pull that off later on. For now, that is Nat's movement 2. Okay, so here we are at the end of Nat's turn 2 then. He got Fireball off on the altar over here, finishing it off. and he got Glory of Gold off on his anointed and made the bats flammable, which was quite amusing, given that the Taurochs were obviously going to smash through them, but he had nothing else to put it on, so made sense, I suppose, in that sense. One wound on the altar over here from the left mortar, and then 9 wounds on the skeletons from the right mortar, so the two mortars both hitting this turn and bringing Nat's shooting averages back up. For his mortars anyway, the ballistas both missed again, so they're still underperforming. And the vassals beat the bats as you would expect them to, and completed a combat reform. The bat swarm did a wound on one of the anointed before the bats died, so I'm quite happy with that as a return. So there you go, that was Nat's turn 2. Okay, on to my movement 2 here then, and you can see I've got a charge off with the altar on the disciples on the flank here. And what I'd done, as planned, was charge with my vampires unit at the vassals with the hope of beating them in combat and overrunning into the side of the disciples here. Now, I needed a 7 on 2 dice, so there was a slightly better than evens chance, but in the end I failed the charge, and maybe I was a little bit greedy, risking the altar on a 7 charge, but anyway, that is the way that it goes. Other than that, I've moved the banshees. That they were all sort of hanging out here by the rock. I've brought one up here into the gap, one across this way. The other one couldn't get in range for shooting at anything that I felt was, particularly worthwhile shooting at. So I dropped one in front of the Taurochs as a chaff, because it's only 155 points. So I'm playing a fairly complicated shooting game over here. I've got my Shrieking Horror coming after the 2 artillery pieces, and then I've got one of my banshees able to shoot at the ballista and the unit here, and then this one able to shoot at either of these units, and this one kind of shooting this way as well. So I've got sort of omnidirectional shooting set up here. Yeah, that was more or less it. Shuffling the Necromancer over to bring him into aura range and doing a bit of reforming and what have you over here. Yeah, that's the end of my movement too. Okay, end of my turn 2 here then, and in the magic phase I have got off a rise and buffed all of my units here, so they're all continuing to swell, which was pretty nice. Nat managed to dispel the rest of my spells though, so fair enough to him. The Shrieking Horror took out a ballista. Perhaps should have gone after the vassal levies as well. What I'm prioritising here is units that can cause me to be flammable, which the Infernal Dwarf Army book has about 1 million of. So I'm trying to get rid of that so that it presents me with less problems later on in the game. But never mind, that's just the way that goes there, still kind of hanging out over there. The Banshees did 4 wounds on the Tauroch Anointed, and then I realised as Nat took them off that this end one was not in fact the Tauroch Commissioner, and so my Banshee here is now blocking no one, because these 2 Banshees here sort of overperformed a little bit. But that's just the way it goes. And then this horror over here was also able to take out a few warriors over here. The Chariot can shoot, the Altar of Undeath can shoot even though it's charged. We did look this up in the rules. We couldn't find anything to say that it couldn't, because it can charge when engaged in combat. You can't shoot if you are in combat or have failed a charge, but the altar can shoot when it's in combat, and it didn't fail a charge, so we decided that it could shoot. But if you know otherwise, then do please let us know. We did check this extensively because we felt that it was wrong, but we couldn't find a rule to contradict it. Anyway, it only did a couple of wounds, took out 1 disciple, a few vassal levies. Drew combat though, which was impressive against the disciples, but then the disciples reformed, and it is now going to take a thorough pounding, I am sure. So that was the end of my turn 2. Okay, on to Nat's movement 3 here then, and you can see that he's combo charged the altar here, presumably looking to get rid of it, maybe do some overrunning, close down the gap on this side maybe. He's charged at the Banshee here, and I think this was a mistake, to be honest, because I think he ought to have gone after this skeleton unit, because he's got paired weapons, so he's overcoming their parry, and this unit with its battle focus should beat the skeletons, who are still fairly small at this stage. If he punches through this unit, then he can get after the Necromancer, and this is one of my scoring units for the secondary objective. So I was really pleased when Nat went for the Banshee over here. Anyway, the Anointed, because of my mishap with the Banshee earlier, have managed to get through and have charged at this unit here, although the Vampire and the Barrow King and the static combat res are going to be against them there, but we'll see how they do. And then Nat's come around with his vassal cavalry over here, and of course he's going to shoot at this Shrieking Horror and make it flammable, and there's very little that I can do about that before he starts pounding it with his flaming attacks from his war machines. Infernal Dwarf book. The less I say about it, the less trouble I will get into. Right, that's the end of Nat's movement 3. Okay, end of Nat's turn 3 here then, and he got Flaming Swords of Ruin off on the Ballista. I think that's the wrong card there, but not to worry. But that would not make any difference because the Ballista would miss its shot against the Shrieking Horror. So a bit of an underperformance from the Ballista. It's failed 3 shots now, although they are only hitting on 5s. But the mortars would make up for it. Nat would get the Curse of Nizbakesh off on the Horror that was here. And then he would hit it with the mortar on a 4+ with its flaming attacks and inflict 3 wounds on it. Then the vassals here would fire at the Shrieking Horror, make it flammable again, and then he would hit on a 4+ with this mortar as well. So the mortars are up now. They've hit 4 out of 6 times, and between them there have just caused 6 wounds on the Shrieking Horror, which doesn't get any of its saves because they've got flaming attacks, and its save is a Fortitude, but it's only a 6+ Fortitude anyway. So that was the end of the Shrieking Horror. And then the altar was smashed over here, as you would expect it to be. In combat over here, Nat issued a challenge with his Torok champion, and I decided to accept that with the Barrow King because I figured that the Torok commissioner was in base contact with him. So if I didn't accept with the Barrow King, then the Barrow King would be taking his attacks anyway, and I'd rather the commissioner go at the unit who have parry and can possibly diminish his returns. So I've accepted with the Barrow King. That means the vampires not getting into an unnecessary combat because these things are hitting with strength 7 AP 4, and I don't want my vampire running into unnecessary combats with those kinds of numbers. Anyway, so the Torok champion would hit with 4 out of 4 attacks. He would wound with 4 out of 4 attacks and kill my Barrow King. And depressingly, that the Barrow King only hit 1 out of 5 times on the return and wounded 0 out of 1 times on the return. So I did expect the Barrow King to be beaten. I didn't expect him to die, and I didn't expect him to do 0 wounds either. So that would mean that I've lost my BSB, and because of the dreadful performance of the Barrow King and the overperformance of the Torok champion, combat was drawn. So that was frustrating. Anyway, that was the end of Nat's turn 3. Okay, on to my movement 3 here then. And you can see I've not declared any charges. I could have declared a charge against these vassal levies, but to be honest, I think that the levies with their paired weapons and battle focus will beat my skeletons. So I want to try and hold this unit off for as long as possible. I'm planning to buff this unit here, force the levies to take some dangerous terrains as well, and then hoping that my vampires unit does a bit of a better job next time. Perhaps maybe takes this unit out and then can come to the rescue. Meanwhile, buffing all my units over here. So that's kind of a rough plan down there. Put the Shrieking Horror down here. What I'm looking for here is 6 attacks that are wounding on 2, so I'm expecting to cause 5 wounds. Perfect average is going to take out this unit, and then a pair of Shrieking Horrors, Banshees this way, trying to take out this mortar, which is just dishing out so much pain. I've got 2d6 plus 4 hits here that are wounding on 5s, and then it'll have a 5 plus armor save. So we'll see how we do there. What am I thinking here? 7 plus 4, 11. Wounding on 5s, call it 4. It'll save a third, so I'm expecting about 3 wounds, 2 or 3 wounds there. Anyway, there you go. That's my movement 3. Okay, so end of my turn 3 here then, and I got a rise off in the magic phase, so buffing my units again here, continuing to swell. And I got Whispers of the Veil off against the Torok Anointed unit. The Banshees did 3 wounds to the mortar, so that was about average, but the Shrieking Horror rolled 2 1s, and so one of the vassal cavalry survived, passing its Discipline 7 test. In combat, the Torok Anointed, with the Torok Anointed, I should say, the Vampire missed 4 out of 5 of his hits on 3 pluses. And then with the 1 hit that did make it through at Strength 6 against Resilience 5, he failed to wound. Oh, that was annoying. But then, after the champion had done 1 wound on the vampire, the Torok Anointed did at least break from the static combat res, and fled. I wasn't able to catch them, but I was able to overrun into the vassals. So that's a new charge. I wheel as much as I can, and then I stop in base contact with my own zombies here, and so the vassals have to close the door, and so they come round onto me. So yeah, that was the end of my turn 3. Okay, Nat's movement 4 here then, and you can see he's not declared a charge on the skeletons, and I think if I'd have been him with these disciples, I definitely would have done that. I mean, you've got the dangerous terrains, but you've also got a ward save, and he's able to hit this unit on the flank as well, and he's really got to get after one of these scoring units in a meaningful way, because his own scoring units are depleted, so the secondary objective is leaning in my direction at the moment. But anyway, he's not done, so I'm delighted that this unit remains unengaged, which is going to just give me more time to continue buffing it, really. And his Torok Anointed here have failed to rally, so that was that. And then he's, of course, turned around to try and fire an incendiary marker on my horror here for the shooting phase later on. So that's Nat's movement 4. Okay, end of Nat's turn 4 here then. He's cast Fireball and Blaze on the zombies over here, which, you know, sort of makes sense. And then he's also got Enveloping Embers on them. So he is going after the scoring unit with his magic, but Enveloping Embers is a bad spell for me because it hits every model in the unit, and it's a big unit, but of course as the unit gets smaller, its effectiveness gets smaller as well. So anyway, he's killed 28 zombies, but that's okay. I'm not overly bothered about that because I can just keep on bringing them back. As long as this unit remains as a sort of a barrier, then that's fine. Both of his mortars have hit my Shrieking Horror, so that is now 6 out of 8 successful attempts on the mortars, although the Ballista has missed again, although again it's only on a 5+, so it's on 0 out of 4. You would have thought it would have hit once now, maybe twice. And he's done 5 wounds on the Shrieking Horror. In combat, he lost resoundingly, but then rolled a double 1. And so the vassal levies have held in combat, and my vampire, although the marker is still there, would succeed his vampiric roll and recover the wound that he lost earlier from combat with the Anointed Champion. So that was the end of Nat's turn 4. Okay, on to my movement 4 here then. There have been no charges, but I have moved the 2 Banshees left here facing this mortar so that I can finish it off, but heading in this direction so that in my turn 5 I'm in range to shriek at the war machines anyway. The Shrieking Horror over here has only got 1 wound left, so I'm heading for the impassable terrain here and bravely hiding, although with my 1 shriek that I will now get, I'm hoping to take out this vassal levy. So it's not been a good game for the Shrieking Horrors at all. The Skeleton Warriors here, having not been charged on the flank, I'm very grateful for that. I've wheeled and now I've got my front facing whatever's going to be coming this way and backing off with my Necromancer again here. So that he's in buff range, but a good healthy distance to anything that might overrun or look to kind of head further this way later on should they punch through the kind of the barrier in front of him. So there you go. That's my movement 4. Okay, on to my turn 4 here then. So Nat used his binding scroll on my vampire's copy of Arise, but that was fine. He also dispelled Hasten the Hour, which was targeting the scoring unit over here, so trying to kind of finish this guy off as quickly as possible. But I did manage to get off a copy of the Dead Arise and brought up a unit of zombies here. I'm trying to kind of put this here as a block, slow down what's kind of going on over here. And then I managed to get off a 6-inch Aura of Arise from my Necromancer and buffed these 3 units yet again. So there's a good size wall and real sort of durability in these units now. And then I managed to get off a small version of Arise from the Necromancer as well, with the new zombies and make them a little bit bigger. The Shrieking Horror finished off the last of the Vassal Cavalry, and the Banshees finished off that mortar there. The Vampires unit beat and caught the Vassals who had fled, but bounced off the zombies just there. I've actually angled the zombies a little bit poorly here because what Nat will be able to do is charge in here with both of his chariots, meaning that this one can just kind of hang on the edge here and then overrun down this line and just clip this Skeleton Warrior here. I ought to have placed those more carefully, but that is just how these things go, really. So that's the end of my turn 4. I think the game's going fairly well. The Shrieking Horrors have had an absolute howler of a day, and my characters have underperformed in combat as well. But I think that the play that I've made and the decisions I've undertaken so far are sort of mitigating what's going on for the most part. So yeah, I'm fairly happy with my play up to yet. That's the end of my turn 4. Okay, on to Nat's movement 5 here then, and you can see that he's got 4 charges off in turn 5. He's come in with the Dwarf Warriors on the Vampire Couch unit here, and then he's got his Prophet on Chariot and his Kadim Chariot on this new unit of zombies, and the Disciples of Luger on the flank of this unit of zombies. Now, I'm not overly bothered about this because the zombies haven't cost me anything. They've just been brought up out of the ground. But of course, there is the danger that if they should crumble, then these units will be able to overrun. So we'll just have to see what happens there. Hilariously, the Torok Anointed and Torok Commissioner have again failed their rally test in turn 5, and that effectively kind of takes them out of the game. Although, were they to come back, earlier, I don't think they'd have been able to kind of get back into combat anyway. So I don't think a massive difference there as long as they rally in turn 6. So that's Nat's movement 5. Okay, so on to the end of Nat's turn 5 here then, and I have dispelled Glory of Gold, which was an obvious attempt to create some flaming attacks for his dwarf warriors and make me flammable. But this is the problem with fighting the Infernal Dwarves. They have so many ways to make you flammable, and they have so many flaming attacks. They basically spend the entirety of the game re-rolling wounds, which is just ridiculously overpowered. So then he would get the 6-inch aura of flaming swords off and the hereditary spell against my vampire's skeleton unit. Anyway, in the shooting phase, the mortar hit the Shrieking Horror. So that's another hit. That's 7 out of 9 hits on 4 pluses, killing off the horror. Sad times there. And then he has, in combat, issued a duel, which I've accepted with my champion. The champion, of course, got pulverized, but the vampire didn't actually take any wounds in spite of being hit with flaming attacks. But then, if you think about it, these Infernal Dwarf warriors are hitting the vampire on 4s, wounding him on 4s, and that's re-rollable 4 because he's flammable and they've got flaming attacks. But then he has a 4-up armor save and a 4-up ward save after that. So even with flammable, they should only do 1 wound on him. But on this occasion, they did none. The vampire's unit has lost combat by 2, and a couple of skeletons have popped. It is worth noting at this point that although the marker isn't there, because the vampire did, I think, 1 or 2 wounds on the Infernal Warriors, with his True Thirst weapon, he's able to raise the champion straight back up again, so that when Nat issues another challenge, the champion that he just killed will hilariously be there to meet him again. Yeah, I like that. It's a cool little Vampire Covenants trick, that. Anyway, that is the end of Nat's turn 5. Okay, on to my movement 5 here then, and I've headed towards the mortar here with the 2 banshees, although I realised after my movement phase I'd made an unforced error here really, because I've left this banshee just over 6 inches away from the mortar, giving the mortar a worthwhile target. I should have just brought him a touch closer, sort of parallel with this one here really. But there you go, it's just the way it goes. And I've charged in here with the skeletons. So my thinking here is that this prophet is going to be killing skeletons whether I charge in with this unit or not. But by charging in, I'm giving myself a charge and another banner, so I'm gaining 2 points there. So I'm going to be on static 8 with this combat, and then I'm hoping my vampire will inflict a few wounds, maybe a stray wound from a skeleton somewhere. I'm expecting to win this combat against these 2 units by about, I don't know, 3 or 4 points is kind of what I'm going for there. Anyway, that's the end of my movement 5. Okay, so into my turn 5 here then, and I've cast Hasten the Hour on the Torok Anointed, just taking a wound off the champion there so that the banshees have got a decent chance of finishing him off, and then I would get the secondary objective is the idea. However, later on in the shooting phase, the banshees would only inflict 2 wounds total from 2d6 plus 4. 1 on the Torok Commissioner and 1 on the Anointed, so that guy's hanging on by a single wound at the end of my turn 5. I would also get Whispers of the Veil off against the warriors over here, making them -1 resilience and -1 discipline. Then in combat, my vampire would underperform yet again. This guy, honestly, he never turns up when you need him to. This is I think the third time during this game that he's inflicted only a single wound. And in the previous few games I've played with him, I've not made battle reports from all of the games, but he's constantly underperformed. For a model with 5 attacks that generally hits on 3s and wounds on 2s, he's shocking. But Nat would also perform very poorly. His Prophet would fail to hit 9 out of 9 times. So that does sort of make up for it. Both of our characters really sort of flapping. I would win combat by 1, and the Prophet would break, and ironically the Infernal Warriors with their reduced discipline would hold. So the Prophet broke from combat and was caught by the skeletons, who ran over into the Disciples, whereas the Warriors here would hold. And I decided not to reform and head this way because the zombies are in the way. I would have liked to have got my Vampire out towards the edge and reduce the number of attacks on him, but the zombies are in the way a little bit here, and Nat didn't pass his leadership test to reform either, so that is how that ended up there. Okay, on to Nat's movement 6 here then. So you can see that he's charged in with the Kadim Chariot and the Dwarf Warriors here. So the question is whether these skeletons are going to be able to endure or not. There are 38 models in this unit. So if Nat scores, 19 points in combat, then the unit will crumble. So 19 is a big ask, but he does have charge, 2 ranks, a banner, a flank, and then he's got 15 attacks on the side here with great weapons, so we'll have to wait and see. Can they hold out for 1 turn? Certainly won't manage any more than that, but we'll have to wait and see. And then up here, here's Torok Anointed has rallied. So that's the end of Nat's movement 6. Okay, and we are into Nat's final turn here. So he has actually miscast. He's attempted Flaming Swords of Ruin, and his miscast is on card 1 as well. So his caster is going to take 4 hits that have AP 10 and wound on a 4+, but that's only likely to cause 1 wound as the caster has his 4-up Aegis save. So I've been forced to dispel the spell in the interests of keeping my Vampire from being at +1 to wound from those attacks from the Infernal Warrior. So that's a bit frustrating. The Catapult has misfired as well. But that just means it can't shoot for the rest of the game, and we're on turn 6, so that doesn't change anything. And the Ballista has missed again, so the Ballista's performance in this game has been utterly shocking, but the Catapults have largely made up for it. And then in combat, the Dwarf Warriors caused 14 wounds out of 15 attacks. And so smashed through the skeleton block and ran into the side of these skeletons here. But then the absolute shocking moment of the game, the Vampire was hit with 9 hits. That's 15 attacks hitting on 4s. Of those 9, wounding on 4s, 5 wounded. He then failed 4 out of 5 armor saves on a 4+, and failed 4 out of 4 ward saves on a 4+, and suddenly my Vampire is dead. So the unit that should have been causing a wound every other turn has just suddenly out of nowhere caused 4 wounds on my Vampire, which is just absolutely shockingly unlucky. So as a result of that, my army has taken the ashes to ashes, and this unit here, which was doing so well, it had about 40 models in it, has suddenly been decimated. Banshees died, and a couple of wounds elsewhere in the other units as well. So just all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a 900 point swing in Nat's favour. Oh, 9 attacks, hitting on 4s, wounding on 4s, 4 up armour save, 4 up ward save, causes 4 wounds on my vampire. Do the maths. Let's just say I said lots of bad words. Right, that's the end of Nat's turn 6. On to my movement 6 here then, and I've not made any supporting charges because the only thing I can bring in to support the skeletons is zombies, which is actually going to give away more points than it's going to earn. So I've just brought the necromancer up here to try and keep him within 6 inches of this unit so that I can supplement it with ranks. Of course, with the vampire just having randomly died, I've only now got 2 copies of Arise, so Nat can probably dispel certainly one, probably both. So this sudden death of my vampire is just causing me all kinds of problems out of nowhere. And the Banshee has got to hang out. Can't go after the war machines over here because I've got to finish off the anointed here. And so now scoring this is absolutely essential all of a sudden, because I'm going to lose, it looks like, one of my scoring units that has been on the front foot for the whole game. Anyway, that's the end of my movement 6. Okay, so end of my turn 6 here then, and Nat has seen the opportunity that he's been gifted and has quite rightly dispelled both of my attempts at a rise. But I did manage to get the Whispers of the Veil off on this unit here, just hoping that might help the skeletons to score a couple of points if one can survive. But you can see there it didn't. We'll get onto that in a minute. So the Banshee, though, did manage to finish off the final Torok Anointed, which means I didn't concede the secondary objective. But with the Infernal Warriors here finishing off my skeletons, I didn't win the secondary objective either. This was enormously frustrating because the death of my vampire meant A, that Nat suddenly picked up 900 points out of nowhere, B, that one of my Banshees died from the Ashes to Ashes rule, so that was just another random 155 points out of nowhere, and then with the core unit over here, that's another 334 points that died from a combination of the Ashes to Ashes and the combat res for the final turn, which simply wouldn't have been the case had the vampire been alive. The Ashes to Ashes alone would have ensured that unit survived. So in the end then, Nat would win by 4,024 to 1,790, so that's a 15-5. However, had the vampire not have died, he would have been up by 845 points. But I would have had the secondary objective. So what was looking like an 11-9 to me, which is only a slender win, but what was looking like an 11-9 has suddenly become a 5-15. So I always like to sort of ask what I did wrong. I always think it's a bit of a cop-out to just kind of blame your opponent's good fortune, and I certainly think I made a mistake with the placement of my zombies on the Dead Arise. I allowed that chariot to get into combat with my vampires unit, which probably helped him a little bit kill off a few skeletons. And I made the odd mistake here and there. I think I misplayed one of the Banshees and opened myself up unnecessarily. I'm not sure whether my approach with the Shrieking Horrors was right. I kind of tried to keep them safe for as long as possible, but I mean, at the end of the day, there's not a lot you can do against an army that's got multiple ways to make you flammable and a bucket load of flaming attacks. The death of the vampire is just astonishing. Just 4 wounds out of nowhere. It's an overperformance by a factor of about 6 or 7. So it really is ridiculous. I mean, those warriors, 9 attacks, 3 ranks, AP4, great weapons, 15 points, core troops. It's absolutely insane. And then also the warriors breaking through on the side here against those skeletons. 14 out of 15 wounds, 14 wounds off of 15 attacks. It's just, I don't know. Anyway, so I'm feeling a bit aggrieved here. I didn't feel like I made too many big mistakes, and the sudden death of my vampire is just, well. Anyway, that is the end of this battle report. It's interesting. I've played 4 games now with this Vampire Covenant army, 3 against Infernal Dwarves, and lost all 3 against the Infernal Dwarves. I've not made battle reports on 2 of the 4 games because they were both over by turn 3 or 4. But yeah, shocking really. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. If you're an Infernal Dwarves player, you probably did. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I'll be throwing this army up, I think, against Silas's Warriors of the Dark Gods soon. So we'll see how that goes. See how it performs against something else. Right. Thanks for joining me, everybody. See you next time.